Have you ever seen a House Speaker forced to resign live on television in American political history? When Mike Johnson made that threat, he couldn't have imagined that the documents Jasmine Crockett would expose would be so devastating. The morning of April 23, 2025, began what would become the shortest tenure of any House Speaker in American history. Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana had held the gavel for exactly 167 days, and in just 14 hours, those days would come to a dramatic and unprecedented end. At 7:43 a.m. that Thursday morning, Johnson sat in his ornate speaker's office, completely unaware that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had spent the previous 18 months building a case that would not only end his speakership, but expose the most sophisticated lobbying scandal in modern congressional history. Johnson had called this early morning meeting with Crockett ostensibly to discuss committee assignments for the upcoming legislative session. But everyone in Washington knew the real purpose. Johnson intended to strip Crockett of her positions on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Oversight Committee as punishment for her aggressive investigation into Republican fundraising practices. What Johnson didn't know was that Crockett had been expecting exactly this confrontation and had prepared accordingly. The Speaker's office, with its soaring ceilings and portraits of former speakers dating back to the 1790s, had witnessed many tense political negotiations over the centuries. But nothing in its storied history would compare to what was about to unfold. Johnson sat behind his massive mahogany desk, flanked by American flags and the symbols of congressional authority, completely confident in his ability to intimidate the second-term Congresswoman from Texas. Jasmine entered the office at exactly 8 a.m., carrying what appeared to be a standard congressional briefing folder. Inside that folder, however, were 247 pages of documentation that would soon trigger the biggest political scandal since Watergate. She had spent 547 days gathering this evidence, following a paper trail that stretched from Washington, D.C. to offshore banking havens, from luxury resorts to private aircraft manifests, from lobbying firms to shell corporations. Congresswoman Crockett, Johnson began, his Louisiana accent adding gravity to his words. I think we need to have a serious conversation about your recent activities on the Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Jasmine sat down across from Johnson's desk, her expression calm and professional. I'm always happy to discuss my committee work, Mr. Speaker. Which activities specifically concern you? Johnson leaned forward, clearly intending to project authority. Your fishing expeditions into Republican fundraising, your baseless accusations against conservative organizations, and your abuse of congressional oversight powers to harass legitimate political entities. I see. And what consequences are you considering for these alleged abuses of power? I'm removing you from both the Judiciary and Oversight Committees, effective immediately. Your conduct has been inappropriate for someone in those positions of responsibility. The threat was clear and devastating. Committee assignments were the source of congressional influence, and stripping Crockett of these key positions would effectively end her ability to conduct oversight or influence legislation. It was a nuclear option that speakers rarely used, and never against members of the opposing party without bipartisan support. But instead of appearing concerned or intimidated, Jasmine smiled slightly. Mr. Speaker, that's an interesting decision. But before you make it official, I think there's something you should know. She opened her briefing folder and pulled out a thick stack of documents. For the past 18 months, I've been investigating not Republican fundraising in general, but one specific pattern of activity that caught my attention. A pattern that involves you personally. Johnson's confident demeanor flickered for just a moment. I have no idea what you're talking about, Congresswoman. My financial disclosures are completely transparent and legal. Oh, I'm not talking about your congressional financial disclosures, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about your work as a lobbyist before entering Congress, and more specifically, your work as an unregistered foreign agent. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet detonated. Johnson's face went pale, but he quickly recovered his composure. That's a serious accusation, Congresswoman, and completely false. I was never an unregistered foreign agent. Jasmine pulled out the first document from her folder. This is a contract dated March 15, 2009, between Michael James Johnson, that's your full legal name, and Petro Global Consulting, a shell company based in the Cayman Islands. According to this contract, You were paid $2.3 million over 4 years to influence U.S. energy policy on behalf of what the contract describes as foreign petroleum interests. Johnson stood up abruptly. That's impossible. I never signed any such contract. The contract bears your signature, Mr. Speaker, witnessed and notarized. But more importantly, it describes work that clearly falls under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, work that you never disclosed to the Justice Department as required by federal law. She pulled out a second document. This is a bank statement from Wells Fargo, account number 4471-8829-3356, registered to M.J. Johnson Consulting, your personal consulting firm. It shows regular deposits from Global Consulting totaling $2.3 million between 2009 and 2013. Johnson sat back down, his hands visibly trembling. Even if such documents existed, which I'm not admitting, the statute of limitations would have run out years ago. You're right about the statute of limitations for the original FARA violations, Mr. Speaker. But there's no statute of limitations for ongoing cover-ups, and that's where this gets really interesting. Jasmine reached deeper into her folder. This is a financial disclosure form you filed when you first ran for Congress in 2016. You were required to list all income sources from the previous 5 years, including consulting work. But there's no mention of the $2.3 million you received from Global Consulting. Filing false financial disclosure forms is a federal crime, Mr. Speaker. And since you've refiled similar forms every 2 years since entering Congress, you've been committing federal crimes continuously for the past 9 years. Johnson's voice was now barely a whisper. Where did you get these documents? That's the beautiful thing about congressional oversight, Mr. Speaker. When we subpoena bank records and corporate filings as part of legitimate investigations, we sometimes find patterns we weren't looking for. Your consulting payments came to light during my investigation of dark money in Republican fundraising. She pulled out another stack of documents. But the story gets much more interesting. In 2017, 1 year after you entered Congress, Global Consulting began making donations to your congressional campaigns through a network of domestic shell companies. Between 2017 and 2024, these donations totaled $847,000, all from the same foreign petroleum interests that had previously paid you directly. That's not just ongoing foreign influence, Mr. Speaker. That's a systematic campaign finance violation involving foreign money being laundered through domestic entities to influence U.S. elections. Johnson was now gripping the edge of his desk. This is all speculation and conspiracy theories. You have no proof of any wrongdoing. Actually, Mr. Speaker, I have overwhelming proof, including recorded phone conversations. Jasmine reached into her folder one more time and pulled out a small digital recorder. This device contains 17 hours of recorded phone conversations between you and representatives of Global Consulting, recorded between 2019 and 2024. In these conversations, you explicitly discuss continuing your work to influence U.S. energy policy in exchange for ongoing campaign contributions. She pressed play, and Johnson's own voice filled the room. The new environmental regulations are going to be a problem for your clients. I can slow them down in committee, but I'll need additional support for my re-election campaign. Johnson lunged forward and grabbed the recorder, but Jasmine had anticipated this. That's just one copy, Mr. Speaker. The original recordings, along with all supporting documentation, have been turned over to the FBI, the Justice Department, and the House Ethics Committee. The room fell silent except for the sound of Johnson's labored breathing. The man who had held the third highest position in American government was realizing that his entire political career was about to end in disgrace. What do you want? Johnson finally asked. I want you to withdraw your threat to remove me from my committees. And I want you to resign as Speaker within 48 hours. And if I don't, Jasmine stood up and began gathering her documents. If you don't, Mr. Speaker, I'll hold a press conference this afternoon and release everything to the media. The FBI investigation will proceed regardless, but at least resignation might preserve some shred of your reputation. Johnson stared at her in disbelief. You planned this entire meeting, didn't you? You knew I was going to threaten your committee assignments. Mr. Speaker, you've been telegraphing your intentions for weeks. My staff has been monitoring Republican caucus meetings, leadership communications, and informal conversations. We knew exactly what you planned to do and when you planned to do it. But more importantly, we've been investigating your financial background since you became Speaker. The Petroglobal payments were just the beginning. We've identified at least 6 other foreign entities that have paid you through shell companies over the past 15 years. She placed a business card on Johnson's desk. This is the contact information for the FBI agent handling your case. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez. She'll be expecting your call. As Jasmine walked toward the door, Johnson called out desperately, "Wait. There has to be another way to resolve this." Jasmine turned back. "Mr. Speaker, you just threatened to destroy my congressional career because I was investigating corruption. You thought you could use your power to silence oversight and accountability. But corruption can't survive in sunlight, and that's exactly what I'm providing. You have until 6 p.m. tomorrow to announce your resignation. If you don't, the press conference will proceed as scheduled." With that, Jasmine left the Speaker's office, leaving Mike Johnson alone with the devastating reality of his situation. Within 6 hours, Johnson's attorneys had contacted the FBI to discuss plea negotiations. By that evening, rumors of his impending resignation were circulating throughout Capitol Hill. At 3:47 p.m. the following day, with just 2 hours and 13 minutes remaining before Jasmine's deadline, Mike Johnson appeared in the House chamber for what would be his final act as Speaker. The chamber was packed with representatives from both parties, all aware that something historic was about to happen, but unsure of exactly what. "Ladies and gentlemen of the House," Johnson began, his voice shaking slightly, "I rise today to announce my resignation as Speaker of the House, effective immediately." The chamber erupted in gasps and confused murmurs. No House Speaker in American history had ever resigned midterm without facing a formal challenge to their leadership. "I have served this institution and the people of Louisiana to the best of my ability," Johnson continued. "But recent developments in my personal affairs make it impossible for me to continue in this role with the focus and dedication that the speakership requires." As Johnson spoke, Jasmine sat in her usual seat in the Democratic section of the chamber, watching the culmination of 18 months of painstaking investigation. Her threat to remove him from committees had backfired spectacularly. Instead of silencing her oversight work, it had accelerated the exposure of one of the most sophisticated corruption schemes in congressional history. The resignation speech lasted only 4 minutes, but its impact would be felt for years. Within hours, the FBI had executed search warrants at Johnson's congressional office, his Louisiana residences, and the offices of 3 lobbying firms connected to Petroglobal Consulting. The federal investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Johnson's activities as an unregistered foreign agent. Between 2009 and 2024, he had received over $4.7 million from foreign petroleum interests, defense contractors, and pharmaceutical companies, all while serving first as a lobbyist and later as a member of Congress. The scheme involved multiple layers of shell companies, offshore accounts, and domestic political action committees designed to obscure the foreign sources of the money. Johnson had used his positions on key House committees to advance the interests of his foreign clients, often at the direct expense of American energy independence and national security. Perhaps most damaging was the revelation that Johnson had shared classified information about U.S. energy policy with his foreign handlers, potentially compromising national security for personal financial gain. This 11th-hour discovery came from encrypted communications found on his personal devices during the FBI raids. 6 months later, Mike Johnson pleaded guilty to violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, campaign finance laws, and federal disclosure requirements. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.7 million in restitution, the full amount he had received from foreign entities. But the impact extended far beyond Johnson's personal downfall. His case prompted a comprehensive review of congressional financial disclosure requirements and led to new legislation requiring real-time reporting of all consulting income by members of Congress and their immediate family members. The scandal also vindicated Jasmine Crockett's approach to congressional oversight. Her methodical investigation, careful documentation, and strategic timing had exposed corruption at the highest levels of government while protecting the integrity of the oversight process itself. 3 months after Johnson's resignation, Jasmine was invited to speak at a conference on congressional ethics hosted by the Brookings Institution. Her presentation, titled Strategic Oversight, Using Congressional Authority to Combat Corruption, became a blueprint for how legislative oversight should be conducted in the modern era. The Johnson case demonstrates that corruption thrives when oversight is weak and dies when oversight is strategic, Jasmine told the audience of ethics experts and congressional staff. Mike Johnson thought he could use his power as Speaker to silence the very oversight that was exposing his criminal conduct. Instead, his attempt at intimidation provided the final piece of evidence we needed to build an airtight case. She continued, "Congressional oversight isn't about partisan politics. It's about ensuring that public officials serve the public interest rather than private interests. When someone tries to obstruct that oversight, they usually have something to hide." The audience gave Jasmine a standing ovation, but the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who had attended the conference, approached Jasmine afterward with a simple message. "You did exactly what congressional oversight is supposed to do. You held power accountable." 1 year after Johnson's resignation, political scientists were already calling the case a watershed moment in congressional ethics enforcement. It had demonstrated that even the most powerful members of Congress could be held accountable when oversight was conducted with sufficient skill, preparation, and determination. The case also established important precedents for how congressional investigators could use modern financial forensics and digital communications analysis to uncover sophisticated corruption schemes. Law enforcement agencies began incorporating Jasmine's investigative techniques into their own training programs. Perhaps most importantly, the Johnson scandal had a deterrent effect on other potentially corrupt officials. The knowledge that congressional oversight could be both sophisticated and decisive made many officials much more careful about their financial relationships and political activities. 2 years later, when Jasmine was asked by a journalist to reflect on the Johnson investigation, she emphasized the broader implications for American democracy. Mike Johnson's biggest mistake wasn't taking money from foreign interests. It was thinking he could use his official power to cover up his crimes and silence the oversight process. Democracy depends on accountability, and accountability depends on oversight. When officials try to obstruct oversight, they're not just committing crimes. They're attacking the foundations of democratic governance itself. The reporter asked whether she felt vindicated by Johnson's ultimate conviction and imprisonment. "This was never about vindication," Jasmine replied. "This was about ensuring that public office serves the public interest." Mike Johnson forgot that distinction, and the American people deserved better. As she had proven with Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh and Texas Governor Abbott, Jasmine Crockett had once again demonstrated that careful preparation, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to accountability could bring down even the most powerful corrupt officials. The woman who had been threatened with the loss of her committee assignments had instead brought down a House Speaker and exposed a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme that had compromised American national security. The folder that had contained evidence of Johnson's crimes as an unregistered foreign agent had delivered its devastating payload, just as her previous investigations had done. And once again, the attempt to silence congressional oversight had backfired spectacularly, strengthening rather than weakening the accountability that is essential to democratic governance. Mike Johnson had learned, too late, that in American democracy, no one, not even the Speaker of the House, is above the law when congressional oversight is conducted with skill, determination, and an unwavering commitment to the truth.